Hi, I'm Ken Feltwell, and welcome to my video on how to make this runic combination lock puzzle box. The wood was taken from an old mantelpiece, and a friend of mine cut it down and machined it to 10mm thick. He said it was so old it was fossilised, but he managed it, so thanks Steve. The first thing I did was to rebate one edge of each piece. I don't have a table router, so I used my homemade CNC machine as a router. Then the wood was cut to width on the bandsaw. I only have a very small workshop and I don't have the luxury of a table saw, so like most people watching this video, I guess I have to use the tools I've got. Once cut, the edges are finished off with a plane or disc sander, and then both pieces are marked out together. I often use a ballpoint pen for marking out these days, something that was frowned upon when I was an apprentice pattern maker many years ago, and my supervisor is probably turning in his grave right now. But I find them accurate and you don't need to sharpen them, so that's what I tend to use. Next, I cut the mitered ends of the pieces of wood. I could use a cross-cut circular saw for this, but I found it chipped out the wood too much, so I use my bandsaw set at 45 degrees. I finished off the edges on my disc sander. Unfortunately, I lost the 45-degree guide, so I had to make one myself. Pieces are then all positioned and held together with a few strips of masking tape. They're then all glued and clamped together, and the glue I've used is Gorilla Glue, but other PVA glues are available. My apologies for the length of this video, but I really don't like speeded up videos, so I've tried to make it as short as possible, but obviously if you get bored you can always fast forward to the next bit. Clamp it up, making sure it's square with your square. Now it's time to mark out the base and lid using my combination square, which is my square of choice, which again harks back to my engineering days. And then the ends are cut on the bandsaw. I've placed a board underneath my work to stop the edge chipping out underneath. The edges are then finished on the disc sander and the piece is tried back in to the box to see if it fits. If it's not quite the right size, then the edge is sanded by hand until it fits perfectly. Just make sure you don't fit the base and lid at the same time, or you could struggle to get them out again. And the lid of the box, so you know which way around to put it back in again when you glue it. Once fitted and you're happy with them, then go ahead and glue them in. Fit the base first so you can make sure it's level with the sides, and once you're happy with that, then fit the lid, and that will be set by the rebate. Remembering of course to clean off any excess glue where you can. Make sure you line your marks up with each other. Once the glue's set, you can go ahead and mark out the slots for the combination lock wheels. And then I like to drill a series of small holes and cut in between each one with the drill itself. Just make sure you stay within the lines. I then tidy up the hole using sandpaper stuck to a piece of 1/4" plywood, which finishes off the hole nicely. The brass plates will cover these holes eventually, so it doesn't have to be too brilliant. Now the good bit. The joint for the lid is marked out and sawn through on the bandsaw. and then finished off on the disc. To fit the hinges, the two halves are held together with a clamp, and then the hinges are taped into position. Drill a 2mm pilot hole in each of the holes, and then put the screws in carefully. I ordered these hinges online and they really weren't what I expected, so at some point I'm going to have to replace them. But for now they'll do. For speed I used the CNC to cut out the brass plates, but these can obviously be done by hand quite easily. I started with 240 grit and gradually moved up the grades until I think I finished with 1200 grit at the end. Finally finishing off with some polishing compound. Until they're all nice and shiny. This is part of one of the lock mechanisms. The two parts of the lock are stuck together with double-sided tape to make sure that they align correctly and the holes are drilled in exactly the same place. Once it's stuck together, they're marked out. And then disked and drilled. The rest of the holes are then marked out. And the holes are started with a centre point. And again drilled as accurately as you can. And the blocks are split apart and the tape removed. Now these are 1mm thick ABS strips and they're to give the combination like that click as you turn the dial. You could use spring steel if you've got any, but I didn't have any, so I've used ABS, which seems to work quite well. Just bending it to shape here. I actually set fire to these a couple of times, but I haven't included that in the video. Perhaps in the outtakes one day. When they've been bent into position and they're cooled, holes are drilled and they're screwed into position. These are some of the parts for the lock mechanism. This screw is simply placed in the middle to temporarily hold it into position while the spring is set. This is then clamped and screwed together. Test it to make sure it's working okay. Piece of 6mm brass is cut and the ends ground. There's a little bit of a chamfer on there. And these are the centre pins for the combination wheel. Which is placed in position, and then the two halves screwed together. This is an angle being ground on the end of the lock, which will allow it to be placed into the box. Once you know they fit okay, they're removed, and then the holes are marked out on the base and drilled and countersunk. Once fitted, they're unscrewed and removed. These brass strips will form part of the lock. They've been cut from a piece of brass I got from an old door. It was the kickboard on the bottom of an old door. Again, these were sanded and polished. These are cut and sanded to length. This is the slot which the brass strip will fit into. At this point it needs to be a tight fit. The strip's then covered with masking tape, and this helps to protect the polish and also helps to mark out the holes. This is the position for the bend. Holes are then drilled and countersunk. And the brass strip is bent to 90 degrees. Well, that's the end of the first half of this video. I hope you've enjoyed watching it, and if so, join me again for part 2.